Chinese characters is the building block for the Chinese language, which is the language used by more people as the first language than any other language of the world. In this video, we are going to do an introductory deep dive into Chinese characters, its history, development, and structure. I hope this will be a video that will benefit you, will open you to new knowledge about Chinese characters, whether you are already a person who speaks Chinese or you don't. In either way, we are going to give you a deep understanding, a new understanding of Chinese characters. If that sounds interesting, let's get into it. The topic of Chinese characters is so broad that I am quite challenged how to approach it in a way that will be useful to you. And so I decided that we are going to do it step by step, subtopic by subtopic, so that I can introduce you to all the various aspects of the Chinese character. And also there are areas which I will not be touching on in this video. Not that I do not want to, but because each topic could be so broad on its own that they deserve a full video of their own. And so in this particular video on Chinese characters, I won't go into simplified Chinese characters. Don't be disappointed. In future, there will be a video that touches on that. But you will see that every single video that I create is to give you a sufficient detailed insight into that particular topic, so that in future you can go back to that particular video and get all the information that you need in this broad series of videos on Chinese history, in particular on Chinese languages. And before we go further in, the first thing is we are going to listen to a China podcast with James and Jessica, our Notebook LM companions, who will be explaining Chinese characters to us. Well, James and Jessica will be doing the explaining, but they are using ingredients which I fit into them. Yes, all the material that they are articulating comes actually from me. So James and Jessica are just syntactic Notebook LM characters who are explaining to you in a chat way, so that to make it easy for you to understand. And then I will return and go through aspect of Chinese characters, its history, development, and structure, so that I will be able to also introduce some terminology that I'll be using not just in this video but in future videos. So this video can serve as an introduction for future videos as I cover the subject deeper and deeper. Okay, and so without further ado, let's go to the China podcast now.
Welcome back to the deep dive. You ready to crack some codes?
Always up for a challenge. What are we diving into today?
Well, thanks to our amazing listeners and the awesome research they send in, today we're going to tackle Chinese characters.
Fascinating. I mean, a writing system that's over 3,000 years old and still going strong. There's got to be a ton to unpack there.
Oh, absolutely. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We'll uncover their origins, see how they've evolved, and get into the cultural significance, too.
Sounds like a plan. Where do we even begin with something this massive?
Well, the listener provided some really interesting stuff. I was particularly struck by one key difference compared to our alphabet.
Oh, you're going to make me feel dumb now. I barely remember my ABCs.
No, nothing like that. It's just, you know how our alphabet uses letters to build words? Well, Chinese characters are different. They're like these self-contained puzzles, each one a whole word or idea.
Ah, got it. Those are called logograms, right? So like instead of spelling out T-R-E-E, you have one character that, bam, means tree.
Exactly. And that got me thinking, how did they even come up with these intricate symbols? Thankfully, your research had the answer. Oracle bone inscriptions.
Ah, yes. Taking us way, way back to ancient China, like Shang Dynasty, around 1600 BCE. Imagine this.
Hit me with it.
People carving questions about the future onto turtle shells or animal bones.
Whoa, hold on. Like fortune cookies, but way more hardcore.
Kinda. They'd heat them up until they cracked, and those cracks, those were like divine messages.
Talk about high-stakes divination.
No kidding. But here's the thing. Alongside those cracks, they found something else on the bones.
Let me guess. The earliest Chinese writing.
Bingo. And get this, they weren't some crazy complex code. The earliest characters were pictograms, basically simple pictures.
So like a drawing of a sun meant sun, mountain, mountain.
Exactly. Imagine drawing a sentence instead of writing it.
I kind of love that. But I imagine that gets pretty limiting, right?
You're right, not super efficient. But as writing became more important, things started to shift. Those pictograms evolved, got more stylized, more abstract.
Makes sense. You got to streamline things.
Right. And they started combining existing pictograms to create new ones, which laid the groundwork for the complexity we see in modern Chinese characters.
So we've got evolving pictograms, new characters coming in. When did they ditch the bones?
Good question. This evolution went hand in hand with the materials they used. Next up, bronze vessels.
Fancy. Like ceremonial stuff.
Exactly. Imagine those intricate designs. Now, you wouldn't carve a bronze pot like you would a bone, right?
So the characters had to adapt to the new surface.
Exactly. They became rounder, more flowing. We call that the bronze script.
It's amazing how the tools influence the writing itself.
Absolutely. But the story doesn't end there.
I figured as much. There's got to be more chapters in this evolution.
Ooh, tons. Put yourself in the emperor's shoes, okay? You're trying to unify this huge empire, but everyone's writing a little differently. What do you do?
Standardize it all.
Ding, ding, ding. That's exactly what happened during the Qin dynasty.
Smart move.
They introduced the seal script, this standardized, balanced form perfect for official documents. Imagine the impact. For the first time, people from all over the empire could easily understand each other's writing.
That's huge. It's like these characters were shaping the empire itself.
No doubt. And we're still pretty early in the timeline.
Wait, there's more.
Oh yeah, we've only scratched the surface. This evolution continues through the Han Dynasty with clerical script, a faster, simpler style, perfect for a growing bureaucracy.
So they were all about efficiency.
Right. And guess what? It's from that script that the regular script, the one we see today, eventually emerged.
So it's like all these scripts, oracle bone, bronze, seal, clerical, they're like stepping stones leading up to the characters we know today.
A perfect way to put it. Each script reflects a stage in this grand evolution, shaped by both practicality and artistry.
That's pretty mind-blowing. But hold on, we're still dealing with thousands of characters here. How do you even begin to make sense of them all?
That's where things get really interesting. Gotta remember, we're not dealing with an alphabet here. Each character isn't just a sound, it's a concept.
Okay, I'm following so far.
But these concepts aren't just randomly thrown together. There's a system, a logic behind it all.
All right, lay it on me. What's this system all about?
Think of it like building blocks.
Building blocks?
Yeah, most Chinese characters are made up of smaller components that give you clues about their meaning and how to say them.
Okay, so instead of thousands of random symbols, you learn these building blocks and how to put them together.
You got it. And that makes things a lot less scary, right?
Definitely. But what are these building blocks called?
They're called radicals and phonetic components.
Radicals and phonetic components. All right, I'm taking notes. So how does that work exactly?
Let's say you see a character with the water radical. It looks like 3 little drops, usually on the left side. You know instantly it's got to be something related to water, river, ocean, rain, you name it.
So the radical gives you the general idea like a category. Pretty clever.
Right. It's like a built-in cheat sheet. But what about how to say the word? That's where the phonetic component comes in.
So it gives you hints about the pronunciation.
Exactly. By understanding both the radical and the phonetic component, you can often make a pretty good guess about both the meaning and the pronunciation of a character.
Even if you've never seen it before.
Yep. It's pretty neat, huh?
That's actually brilliant. It's like a mini language within each character.
You're getting it.
But didn't your research mention something called the Lushu? Something about 6 principles?
You've been doing your homework. The Lushu is basically a way to categorize Chinese characters based on how they were formed and how their meanings developed over time.
So like a family tree for characters.
Kind of. Remember those pictograms we talked about? The ones that actually look like the objects they represent?
Right, like mountain looking like a mountain. That was principle number 1, wasn't it?
Exactly. But it doesn't stop there. Some characters are ideograms.
Ideograms. What are those?
They represent abstract concepts with simple symbols. Like the character for above is just a line over another line, a visual representation of the concept.
So you have pictures for concrete stuff and symbols for abstract ideas. What if you want to combine those ideas?
That's where compound ideograms come in. You take two or more simple elements and bam, new meaning. Like the character for bright, it combines the symbols for sun and moon. Get it? The brilliance of both.
Wow, that's actually pretty poetic. Okay, so we've got pictograms, ideograms, and compound ideograms. What about the other three?
Well, the fourth principle is really important for understanding how Chinese characters work. It's called phonosemantic compounds.
Monosemantic compounds. Try saying that 3 times fast.
I know, right? But it's not as complicated as it sounds. Remember those radicals and phonetic components we were talking about? This principle combines them both.
Ah, so it's not just random parts thrown together. Each one has a job to do.
Exactly. You get a radical for the general meaning and a phonetic component to help you with the pronunciation.
Okay, that makes more sense. So what about the last 2 principles?
The fifth one is borrowed characters. Think of them like words that changed their meaning over time. They originally meant one thing, but then people started using them for other words that sounded similar.
So like a linguistic chameleon.
Perfect analogy. And lastly, we have derivative cognates. These are characters that started from the same ancestor, but gradually developed slightly different meanings.
So like distant cousins of characters.
You could say that. Isn't it fascinating how much history and logic is packed into each character?
Totally. This Luciu system is like a secret decoder ring for understanding Chinese characters. But I'm curious, how does all this compare to our own alphabet?
That's a fantastic question, and it really highlights the fundamental differences in how these two writing systems approach language.
Like what?
Well, the Roman alphabet is phonetic, right? Each letter represents a specific sound.
Right, we string those sounds together to make words.
Exactly. But with Chinese characters, they're logograms. Each one represents a whole word or concept, meaning and sound all wrapped up in one symbol.
So it's like we break down words into sounds, while Chinese characters capture the whole idea at once.
Precisely. And that has some pretty interesting implications.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, it means we have a small set of letters, but Chinese has thousands of unique characters.
Whoa, that's a lot to remember.
It is. And it's not just the number of symbols that's different.
You mean the way they look?
Exactly. Our letters are simple, right? Most have just a few strokes. But Chinese characters, some have one stroke, others have dozens, all these intricate, beautiful patterns.
Ah, that's why calligraphy is such a big deal in Chinese culture. It becomes an art form with those visually rich characters.
Absolutely. And there are other differences too.
Like what? Tell me more.
Well, think about the direction of writing. We typically write horizontally, left to right.
Right.
Chinese traditionally was written vertically, top to bottom, though now horizontal, left to right is common too.
Interesting. So what about grammar? How does that work with characters?
We rely on word order and verb conjugations, right, to show how words relate to each other.
Yeah.
In Chinese, a lot of the grammatical information is carried by the characters themselves. Context is super important too.
So it's not just about learning individual characters. It's about understanding how they all fit together in a sentence.
Exactly. It's like a totally different way of thinking about language.
My brain is already doing somersaults.
Mine too. And there's one more big difference we haven't talked about.
Hit me with it.
It's the cultural and aesthetic dimension. Think about it. Our alphabet is mostly functional, right?
Yeah, it's about conveying information.
Right. But Chinese characters, they have this deep artistic and philosophical meaning woven into them. Think about the art of calligraphy, how the brushstrokes themselves become this expression of beauty, balance, harmony.
I've always found calligraphy mesmerizing. It's like each stroke has a story behind it.
It's more than just writing. It's an art form totally intertwined with Chinese culture, reflecting their values and philosophy.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. It's incredible how much more there is to these characters than meets the eye.
And that brings us to their enduring legacy.
Their legacy.
Think about it. Chinese characters have transcended their role as just a writing system. They've become a symbol of cultural identity, artistic expression, and a connection to thousands of years of history and philosophy.
You mentioned calligraphy earlier. It's more than just fancy handwriting, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's about the beauty of the strokes, the balance, the flow of energy. It's like a visual meditation on the meaning of the words themselves.
It's not just what you write, but how you write it.
Precisely. And it ties directly into those core values of balance and harmony that are so central to Chinese culture.
And the influence of these characters extends beyond China, right? What was it? Japanese kanji and Korean hanja.
Exactly. They both originated from Chinese characters, adapting and evolving to fit their own languages. Pretty amazing, right?
It's incredible how these symbols have rippled across cultures and languages.
It really shows the power of writing to connect people and ideas across time and space.
So where does all this leave us as learners who are used to our simple alphabet? How do we even wrap our heads around this?
That's the big question, isn't it? How do different writing systems shape the way we understand language?
Yeah, it's like learning Chinese characters could be learning a whole new way of thinking.
It challenges our assumptions about how language works, how meaning is conveyed, and how writing can be both functional and artistic.
It's like we're stepping outside our linguistic comfort zone and expanding our minds in the process.
Exactly. That's one of the most rewarding things about exploring different writing systems. We have to reconsider what we think we know about language and appreciate the incredible diversity of human expression.
Man, I'm already feeling my brain stretching. So if we had to boil down the main takeaways from this deep dive into Chinese characters, what would you say are the most important things for our listeners to remember?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is that Chinese characters are like a window into this incredibly rich cultural and linguistic heritage. When you understand their structure, their evolution, and their significance, it deepens your appreciation for language itself. It's not just about memorizing symbols, it's about understanding a different way of seeing and interacting with the world.
It's like cracking a code that unlocks this whole new realm of knowledge and understanding.
I like that. It's a journey worth taking, for sure.
Well said. Okay, folks, looks like we've reached the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of Chinese characters. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question to ponder.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Hit me with it.
What does it mean to read and write in a logographic system like Chinese compared to our alphabetic one? Does it shape the way we think, the way we see the world, the way we connect ideas?
Now, that is a great question, and it's one that linguists and cognitive scientists are still trying to figure out.
So there's no easy answer.
Not really, but there are some intriguing theories. Some folks think that logographic systems might encourage a more holistic way of thinking, where you grasp meaning in chunks instead of sequentially.
So instead of breaking it down bit by bit, you see the whole picture at once.
Exactly. And others point out that the visual nature of Chinese characters might boost spatial reasoning and memory.
It's mind-blowing to think that the way we write could actually affect the way we think.
It really highlights that deep connection between language, culture, and cognition.
Well, folks, there you have it, a final mind-bender to send you off on your own linguistic adventures. We encourage you to explore further, dive deeper into the mysteries of Chinese characters, and discover the infinite possibilities of language. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. But until then, keep those brains buzzing and that curiosity high.
While James and Jessica take a breather from their podcast, I just want us to think about the differences of how languages develop in the West compared to in the East. In the West, in Europe, languages develop their writing system based on sounds. So they put components of sounds together to form words, and that is how we have the alphabet. So the alphabet on its own, A, B, C, D, on its own they are meaningless. But these are just building blocks which we put together to form a syllable, and from the syllables, which most of them may still be meaningless, we put them together and they form words. In comparison, Chinese characters may be a meaning or a concept or an idea of its own. So this meaning and concept is encapsulated within that Chinese character. But it doesn't mean that every language in Asia is similar to Chinese languages and use the same concept, even languages that are using Chinese characters. For example, the Japanese language may, to a certain extent, have more in common with Latin than it does with Mandarin if we look at the conjugation or word inflection. If you compare Latin with Japanese, you will see a similarity in that they have a lot of verb or word endings. So too in Japanese and Latin. So they have a lot of conjugation and inflection to show different aspect of the word. However, in Chinese language, in Mandarin, for example, each word is stand alone and it encapsulates a specific meaning. How different cultures approach languages may also affect how people think in that particular culture. And as we go back to the second part of the exposition on Chinese characters with James and Jessica, they will give us an explanation of how these Chinese characters may possibly affect the way Chinese people think. And so let's go back to the second part of our exposition, the China podcast part 2.
It really is amazing to think about, isn't it?
Totally. But hey, if you're just tuning in, we're on a deep dive into the world of Chinese characters.
We've been talking about how they're not just letters, they're these amazing little packages of meaning and sound.
And we were just discussing how different that is from our own alphabet.
Right. Think about it. We have 26 letters, and we combine those to make thousands of words. But in Chinese, there are thousands of unique characters.
Yeah, each one a whole word or idea in itself. It's a lot to take in.
Definitely. And it can seem overwhelming at first, but there's a method to the madness.
That's what we're here for, right? To break it all down. So what makes these characters tick? What's the logic behind them?
Well, remember those radicals and phonetic components we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, those building blocks that make up most characters.
Exactly. Those are key. They're like little clues that help you decipher the meaning and pronunciation of a character.
Okay, so remind me again, how do those work?
Think of it this way. The radical gives you a general idea of what the character is about, like a category.
Right, like the water radical you mentioned before.
Exactly. 3 little drops, usually on the left side, and you instantly know it's something related to water. Could be a river, an ocean, rain, a tear, anything.
So it narrows down the possibilities.
Yep. And then you've got the phonetic component, which gives you hints about how to pronounce the character.
So it's like a two-part system, meaning and sound.
Precisely. By combining those two clues, you can often figure out a character you've never even seen before.
That's so cool. It's like a puzzle you can solve.
It really is. And it gets even more interesting when you start looking at how these characters evolved over time.
Oh yeah, we were talking about all those different scripts earlier. Oracle, bone, bronze, seal, clerical.
Each one reflects a stage in the development of the writing system, shaped by practical needs and artistic influences.
It's amazing how something as simple as a writing system can tell you so much about a culture.
It's true. And when you understand the history, it gives you a whole new appreciation for the complexity and beauty of Chinese characters.
It's like each character has a story to tell.
Exactly. And that brings us to something really fascinating, the Lushu.
The Lushu. That sounds familiar.
We touched on it briefly before. It's basically a way of categorizing Chinese characters based on how they were formed and how their meanings developed.
Oh, right, like a family tree of characters.
Got it. It helps us understand how those simple pictograms from the Shang dynasty evolved into the complex characters we see today.
So break it down for me. What are these 6 principles?
Okay, the first one is the easiest pictograms. Remember those. They're the characters that look like the objects they represent.
Like sun looking like a sun, mountain looking like a mountain.
Exactly. Then we have ideograms, which represent abstract concepts with simple symbols, like above, which is just a line above another line. It's a visual representation of the concept.
Makes sense. So we've got pictures for concrete things and symbols for abstract ideas. What about when you want to combine those ideas?
That's where compound ideograms come in. You take 2 or more simple elements and put them together to create a new meaning. For example, the character for bright combines the symbols for sun and moon.
Ah, I see. The brilliance of both. That's really clever.
Isn't it? And that's just 3 out of the 6. We're just scratching the surface here.
Look, what about the other 3?
All right, so principle number 4 is called phonosemantic compounds.
Phonosemantic compounds. That's a mouthful.
I know, right? But it's simpler than it sounds. It's basically combining a radical and a phonetic component.
Ah, so you get a clue about the meaning and the pronunciation all in one character.
Exactly. And then we have borrowed characters. Think of it like this. A character that was originally used for one word gets adopted for another word that sounds similar.
So it's like the character's moonlighting, taking on a second job.
I like that. And then lastly, we have derivative cognates. These are characters that started from the same ancestor but slowly developed different meanings over time.
So like distant cousins of characters.
Perfect analogy. It's amazing how much history and evolution is packed into each character, isn't it?
Totally. And this Lushu system really helps make sense of it all. It's like a decoder ring.
Exactly. And it highlights just how different Chinese characters are from our own alphabet.
So how do they compare? We've touched on some differences, but I'm curious to dive deeper.
Yeah, let's explore that a bit more. It's a fascinating comparison.
All right, so we know that Chinese characters are logograms, meaning they represent whole words or ideas. But what does that mean in practice? How does it affect the way you learn and use the language?
Well, for one thing, it means that unlike with an alphabet where you learn a handful of letters and then combine them in different ways, with Chinese, you're essentially learning a new symbol for every new word or concept.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of memorization.
It definitely can be.
Hmm.
But it also means that each character carries a lot of weight. It's not just a sound, it's a whole package of meaning and cultural significance.
I'm starting to see how that could affect the way you think about language. It's less about breaking things down into individual sounds and more about grasping concepts as a whole.
Exactly. And the visual nature of the characters plays a big role too.
Yeah, we were talking about that before. The way they look, the intricate strokes, the artistry of calligraphy, it's all connected, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's not just about conveying information, it's about expressing beauty, balance, harmony, values that are deeply ingrained in Chinese culture.
And that visual element, the way the characters are structured, does that affect how people learn and remember them?
That's a great question, and there's definitely a lot of research being done on that. Some studies suggest that the visual complexity of Chinese characters might actually improve memory and spatial reasoning skills.
Whoa, really? So
Yeah.
learning Chinese could actually make you smarter.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves, but it does suggest that different writing systems might engage our brains in different ways.
That's fascinating. And what about grammar? How does that work with characters? We rely so much on word order and verb conjugations.
In Chinese, the grammar is a bit more fluid. Word order matters, but it's not as strict as in English, and a lot of grammatical information is actually embedded in the characters themselves.
So it's like the characters are doing double duty,
Yeah.
conveying meaning and grammar all at once.
Exactly. And context plays a huge role too. You have to pay attention to the overall meaning of the sentence to figure out how the characters are functioning grammatically.
It's like a whole different way of approaching language.
It really is. And it's one of the things that makes learning Chinese such a rewarding challenge. It forces you to step outside your linguistic comfort zone and really stretch your mind.
I'm starting to feel the stretch already. But it's a
Yeah.
good stretch, right? Like a mental workout.
Exactly. And it's amazing how much we can learn about ourselves and the world around us simply by exploring different ways of communicating.
Okay, so we've talked about how characters are structured, how they've evolved, how they compare to our alphabet. What about their impact on culture? We touched on calligraphy, but there's got to be more to it than that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Chinese characters are so much more than just a writing system. They're deeply woven into the fabric of Chinese culture, art, philosophy, even everyday life.
Give me some examples. How do they show up in everyday life?
Well, think about Chinese New Year. The decorations, the calligraphy scrolls, the red envelopes with lucky characters on them, those are all infused with meaning derived from the characters themselves.
So it's like the characters are part of the celebration. They add another layer of meaning to it.
Exactly. And think about traditional Chinese medicine. Many of the herbs and treatments are named using characters that reflect their properties or effects.
Wow, so even in healing, the characters play a role. It's incredible how deeply they're embedded in the culture.
It really is. And it goes even deeper than that. In Chinese philosophy, the characters themselves are often seen as embodying cosmic principles, representing the balance and harmony of the universe.
So it's like they're not just symbols on a page, they're reflections of a whole worldview.
Exactly. And that's why calligraphy is considered such a high art form. It's not just about pretty handwriting. It's about capturing the essence of the characters, the energy and balance they represent.
It's like you're channeling something deeper through the act of writing.
Exactly. And that connection between language, art, and philosophy is something that's been central to Chinese culture for thousands of years.
It's so different from the way we typically think about writing in the West. It's more functional for us,
Right.
a way to convey information.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. But exploring other systems like Chinese characters can really open your eyes to the different ways that language can be used and appreciated.
It's like a reminder that there's always more to learn, always new perspectives to discover.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the incredible legacy of Chinese characters.
Their legacy, what do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. They've been around for over 3,000 years, evolving and adapting, but always retaining that core essence.
And they've spread beyond China too, right?
Yeah.
With Japanese kanji and Korean hanja.
Exactly. They've influenced other cultures, other languages, and they continue to be a source of fascination and inspiration for people all over the world.
It's like they're a testament to the power of language to transcend borders and time.
And that's something worth celebrating, don't you think?
Absolutely. But before we get too carried away, let's bring it back to our listeners.
Good idea. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. So for those who are just tuning in or maybe feeling a little overwhelmed by all this information, what would you say are the key takeaways from our deep dive into Chinese characters?
I'd say the most important thing to remember is that these characters are more than just symbols on a page. They're a window into a rich and fascinating culture, a different way of thinking about language, and a reminder that there's always more to learn about the world around us.
I like that. It's not just about memorizing characters, it's about expanding your horizons.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe this deep dive will inspire some of our listeners to start their own journey into the world of Chinese characters.
I hope so. Because trust me, it's a journey worth taking.
And we're here to help guide you along the way.
That's right. But before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a little food for thought.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Hit me with it.
We've talked a lot about the differences between Chinese characters and our own alphabet. But what does that really mean for us as learners and as thinkers?
That's a great question. It gets at the heart of how language shapes our perceptions of the world.
Does learning a logographic system like Chinese change the way you think? Does it make you more visual, more holistic in your thinking?
Those are some of the big questions that linguists and cognitive scientists are still grappling with.
So no easy answers.
Not yet, but that's what makes this so exciting. There's so much we're still learning about the brain and how it interacts with language.
And who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be the one to crack the code.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
It would. All right, folks, that about wraps up our deep dive into the incredible world of Chinese characters. But before we sign off, I want to say a huge thank you to our listeners for sending in such fascinating research and for joining us on this linguistic adventure.
We couldn't do it without you.
And remember, even if you never become a master calligrapher, just appreciating the beauty and history of these characters can change how you think about language and culture.
I completely agree. There's always something new to discover. That's what makes exploring language so captivating.
For sure. And if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we've got some amazing resources for you. From online dictionaries to calligraphy tutorials, you'll find links to all of that in the show notes.
Don't hesitate to share your thoughts and discoveries with us, too. We love hearing from fellow deep divers.
Until next time, keep exploring.
It really makes you realize just how much our writing system shapes our worldview.
It's like we're so used to thinking in terms of letters and sounds that we forget there are other ways of approaching language.
Right. And those other ways can offer us new insights, new ways of understanding the world around us.
So what's the takeaway here? Should we all ditch the alphabet and start learning Chinese?
Haha, not necessarily, but I do think there's a lot we can gain from simply being aware of these different systems.
Yeah, even if you don't become fluent in Chinese, just appreciating the beauty and complexity of the characters can really expand your horizons.
Exactly. It's like a mental workout, stretching those cognitive muscles.
And who knows, maybe it'll even spark a lifelong passion for language learning.
That would be awesome.
Well, folks, looks like we've reached the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of Chinese characters. But before we go, I want to give a huge shout out to all our amazing listeners.
You guys are the best.
Thanks for sending in such incredible research and for joining us on this linguistic adventure.
We couldn't do it without you.
And remember, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we've got tons of resources for you in the show notes.
Yeah, everything from online dictionaries to calligraphy tutorials. Go check them out.
And don't be shy about sharing your thoughts and discoveries with us.
We love hearing from fellow language nerds.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and that curiosity high.
Happy exploring.
Chinese characters provide us a glimpse into the thought process of the people of the Far East. And why are there Chinese characters? Well, Chinese characters or writing system at large is a way of communicating. And this is, we can say, a need. When there is a need, then there is a need to invent. For needs are the mother of all inventions. So for the people of the Far East, they created this writing system out of their need to commit something to memory as well as to communicate something. Because after all, our brain is sometimes, we have to acknowledge, quite faulty. We cannot remember stuff. So when we commit it into writing, we can remember it better because we do not have to hold it all the time in our memory. And that's the mother of invention, including the invention of writing system, which forms Chinese characters. For the development of Chinese characters, we can trace all the way back to over 6,000 years ago. 6,500 years ago, archaeologists has uncovered the earliest form of writing system in the Far East. However, the first actual characters that would be the prototype for the later Chinese characters came about in the Shang dynasty, which is between 1,600 years BC to 1046 BC. And those are called the oracle bone inscription. Yeah, they are inscribing on bones so that it will be an item that can be preserved, more or less like carved in stone. If something is important, you want to keep it in memory, so they carve on bones. So these oracle bone inscriptions provide us a glimpse into the earliest development of Chinese characters. And from then on, Chinese characters continue to develop in a very disparate way. China is a very vast country, so all over China, there could be development of writing system that are running in parallel. They are not like going all at once. However, by the time of the Qing dynasty, which is 220 BC to 206 BC, under the Qing Emperor Shi Huang, the emperor finally consolidated everything and instituted a language or writing reform. And from then on, there is a proper writing system for the first time for a unified China. That writing system, we know it today as the small seal script. The small seal script, which nowadays look a little bit like pictogram because it is so representative of picture writing. But that is the earliest form of Chinese writing system or the prototype for Chinese characters to come. From then on, development continues on Chinese characters, but for the first time during the Qing dynasty, we have a unified way of writing, at least for the imperial court, or rather for the empire according to a single ruler. 202 BC to 220 AD, another way of writing or script called the clerical script comes about. And with that, the design, the style of Chinese characters changed. From then on, different writing style or script continue to be developed. And this development is not in tandem. That is to say, not one neatly after the other. No, not like that. But rather it runs sometimes parallel and sometimes it overlaps one to the other. So during the Han Dynasty, a new writing style or script called the clerical script was developed. And this clerical script differs from the earlier small seal script in that it gradually moves China away from the pictogram style into more towards what we consider today as Chinese characters. For example, the character for horse changed from like this to like this, and the character for sky changed from like this to like this. Concurrently, a cursive and semi-cursive style also developed. And this happens also during the Han and Qing dynasty. And during this period, the cursive style will also show the horse will now look like this in the cursive style and like this in the semi-cursive style, while the word for sky look like this in the cursive style and like this in the semi-cursive style. So how the same character is written continue to be modified over time, even though we in present day time or looking back for and forward might be able to recognize how each character, because these characters have more or less taken on a similar form, despite whether it is in the small seal script style or clerical style, cursive style or semi-cursive style. The writing style of Chinese characters that we are most familiar with, which we know today as either the traditional Chinese characters, is the regular script. And this regular script was more or less invented by a calligrapher by the name of Zhong Yao during the time 230 AD. So from this period onwards, the development of this regular script style is the form that is used for writing literary Chinese. Literary Chinese, which I mentioned in our previous video on from literary Chinese to modern standard Mandarin, that writing system is in the regular script. And this regular script will remain more or less unchanged for the next 1,000+ years until the beginning of the 20th century, and in fact into the 20th century as the traditional Chinese characters, before we finally adopted for China and Malaysia and Singapore the simplified Chinese characters. So this writing system, which we know as traditional Chinese characters, is in the script form called regular script. Once this regular script form becomes popular, it is the style that is being used across much of China even when new Chinese characters were developed. And through its 1,000-year history, there are new characters that came into the language, or rather languages of China, and characters that drop out of use. And this happens not in a straight line, but rather it happens all over China. Even so, all over China, there would be a collection of Chinese characters that is used to write something, to telecommunicate, to communicate across China, and these collectively form the writing system that we know as literary Chinese. So this literary Chinese that is written using the regular script is a form of communicating in written form by people across the vast expanse of China, independent of pronunciation, because every province will pronounce it differently, and we will go into pronunciation in a separate video because it's so interesting to cover also. Across this vast expanse of China, there is this collection of Chinese characters that came together, and it is literary Chinese that can be used to communicate across the vast expanse, even though there are instances where there may be Chinese characters that are in use in specific provinces that are not part of this canonized group of Chinese characters used for literary Chinese. That is to say, in addition to this, what we have in literary Chinese, there could be regional characters that is specific for regions only, and those might be used only on the vernacular level. That is to say, for the communication of people for that particular region according to their spoken language. But whatever it is, writing system and communication in writing is the game of the elites. That is to say, only the rulers and the upper class have means to learn how to read and write Chinese characters. And when they are able to do that, they are able to communicate across China using literary Chinese. The rest of the population, which is 99% of the people or even more, remain illiterate right up to the 20th century, when finally literacy was opened up to everybody in China. So up to that point, despite all the changes and development of Chinese characters, it is something that is the purview of the elites. Only the ruling class, only the upper class merchants and bureaucrats have a chance to learn to read and write and communicate using Chinese characters, in whichever script, whether it is in the regular script or in the earlier form of cursive, semi-cursive, clerical, or small seal script. All of this is within the purview of the ruling class. And so, my dear friend, that is our introduction into Chinese characters, and there's still so much for us to cover, but as I mentioned, we are going to cover it in a very comprehensive manner so that you have a great clarity of our history, our identity of being Chinese. I hope you really enjoy what I have researched, because it takes a lot of effort to do this research to explain everything to you. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it so that other people will know about your history and my history as a Chinese person. And in our future videos, I will continue to cover other aspects, and maybe I will do deeper dives in the specific areas of Chinese history and the history of Chinese languages. So if you want to join me, don't forget to subscribe to the Learn Penang Hokkien YouTube channel. Yes, it says Learn Penang Hokkien because eventually I'm going to go back to talking about Penang Hokkien. But for us to appreciate Penang Hokkien, we have to appreciate all the Chinese languages so that we can know how everything fits together. And so I would strongly welcome you to be a subscriber to this YouTube channel so that we can do this together. And until I see you again, 感謝你姐姐。